Hazy, go ahead.
Most of my most of my comment is simply vibing off of what everyone else has said so far. I believe that once again, a religion is an adherence to a particular faith and principles and beliefs, and effectively, what is sufficient, especially since, uniquely at the very least, I think there is a strong prescription for those who follow Hinduism to abide by the rules due to there being an incarnation, a reincarnation. Something we can delve into a bit more, but I think that's especially with all those other facets and how they're functionally comparable in those regards. I think religion is a sufficient enough terminology to describe what is Hinduism to a larger degree.
Yeah, well said. I agree.
Yep.
Is that better on the gain?
Oh, a lot better, thank you.
Yeah.
And we touched on this slightly earlier as well. One more thing I want to touch before we go to our break. But Hazy brought up a good question where you see a lot of times this conversation alongside Hinduism and other groups brought up, and that is Buddhism. Would you guys like to clarify on the Hindu relationship to Buddhism? Is Buddhism part of Hinduism in a smaller sect, or their own individual thing with their own teachings and structures?
Yeah, so I think the problem is sometimes when answering these questions is there's what I feel and then what's politically correct. And I think for the sake of this conversation, I think I do justice to the podcast if I say throw political correctness aside. If we hurt feelings, we're hurting feelings. To me, we would say Buddhism is part of the Gnostica sect of Hinduism. And yeah, Buddhists, they want to feel separate because feeling separate makes them feel important, but you can't. They believe in reincarnation.
Gnostic means essentially non-theistic in nature.
Yeah, exactly. It is, so they believe in reincarnation, they believe in karma, they believe in dharma, they believe in all the fundamental principles that Hinduism believes in too. They just don't believe in this idea of a supreme being. And, if you understand Hinduism, God is important, 100%. But the way they look at that, they don't just say, oh, there's no God. They call this they almost deify this idea of nothingness. And that word in Buddhism is called shunya, which means zero. It means zero. And they look at this zero. We could even go to the writings of Nagarjuna, who is a very famous Buddhist saint, who deifies almost this idea of shunya. He's like, through shunya, through emptiness, all things are possible. And all things would not be possible without the shunya. You could replace that shunya with God. All things are possible because of God, and nothing is possible without God. You could say that. And so the fact that they meditate on this emptiness, they venerate this emptiness, they show gratitude toward this emptiness. Is it really, at that point, any different from a God? Based on how you ontologically look at it. So Buddhism is saying
they ontologically create a being of themselves, basically, for what they adhere to. And ironic twist. And one more thing, too. Definitely do not be afraid of political correctness. I've said this earlier, but I want you guys to feel freely and speak your mind. I enjoyed a conversation. I'm looking for intellectual, mature conversations. And to be blunt, I don't care if I hurt people's feelings doing that. So do not feel at all like you have to hold your tongue on anything.
100%. Appreciate that. I'm on board.
Definitely. And Duke, would you also like to comment on that as well, or are you okay if I move over to the next question?
We keep moving.
Okay, sounds good. So my next question, I'm actually going to direct this one a bit to Duke, because Sammy has been touching on this as well. But how does Hinduism approach the concept of life after death? And what are some of the beliefs regarding reincarnation? What are some of the tenets you guys hold on that?
Life after death, honestly, in Hinduism, it is just that. It's an afterthought. And you kind of see this because in a lot of the earlier texts, Sammy brought up Yama, the messenger of death. There's like a really, really cool story in the Upanishads about him coming to get your soul. But the story doesn't even touch on what happens after. Now, there's stories later on and things like that, but the main idea of the messenger of death in that story is to actually teach a young boy how to live his life righteously. And so I think the foundational elements of Hinduism has this concept of reincarnation very much steeped in, but life after death is just that. It's very much an afterthought. You see this all the way up even to the Bhagavad Gita, where there's just this idea of you do what you do. There are references to martyrdom in the Bhagavad Gita, so that if you die fighting a war that's just, you will obtain quote unquote heaven. So there are these ideas that float around. I think Hinduism leaves it kind of as an open door in terms of what may or may not happen. I remember reading a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita that said that reincarnation is a scientific theory that we hope to be able to prove one day, literally through steps. So, I think until that point, Hinduism is comfortable leaving the door sort of open. What was the second part of that question, though?
Sure. The second part of the question was talking about reincarnation, and basically, what is reincarnation for someone who's never heard of it before, and what are some of the core tenets of it?
Right. There's a beautiful Bhagavad Gita verse. I think it's in chapter 2. I have to check, but it says, just as the man changes clothes, so does the soul change bodies. And this idea is, physics in mind. It's this idea that energy is simply transferred through different states and never created nor destroyed. And this body that we inhabit right now is simply our soul as energy perceiving this universe with these senses in this moment. And when time comes, you leave, and your soul, and if this is the case and this is what happens, then it takes on another body. Now, we don't know what that body will be, and this is where you get the later texts with dialectics, like Sammy always says, where people are discussing what might happen. Ooh, this person doesn't have this, maybe this happened. But, they themselves are just having that dialectic. It's still very much open. But that is the core tenet. I think it's literally one verse in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, the verse is, just as a person sheds worn out garments and wears new ones, likewise at the time of death, the soul casts off its worn out body and enters anew. And what reincarnation as an idea is really reflecting in terms of how Hindus understand it is that the bodies that we are occupying, right? It doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. It's something that we're borrowing, like we're renting out for just this lifetime. And it is something that we should not hold any attachment to. Our soul or Atma will jump into another body and we'll never see this one again. And it's temporary. Things that are created must be destroyed. And so, I think that's the sort of philosophical implication of sort of asserting reincarnation. And also, and additionally, I think you can't have the conversation about reincarnation without discussing karma, because that is what we say. But yeah. Well, you go ahead and ask your question, and we can go talk about it.
Oh, no, that's fine. I was just going to bring that up after the reincarnation one, but I saw Hazy actually had a question he wanted to ask.
It's weird because we're all intertwining into the same question. I was going to, since we were discussing reincarnation and the brevity in which we are in this being, in the finite amount of time, karma is something I was intrigued in asking about, since I wanted to know how much does it interplay within reincarnation, and that is it a aspect in which there could be a reward or punishment for actions committed within that time frame of living in that body for whatever brief moment of time it was there, or whatever actions happened within that time frame. So that's what I was asking. I wanted to know about.
So I guess you guys want to tackle that then?
Yeah. So we're talking about consequences of our action. Like, the idea of karma. So yeah, I guess I'll continue with my thought, which is karma is just cause and effect. When you do something, it will create effects, and these are very, I guess, quote unquote, vibrational in throughout the cosmos or universe, and they come back. And like I said, Duke made a really great point, which is the door is left wide open in the afterlife. How that karma will affect us, whether it is, a higher level life form, lower level life form, quote unquote, or things that will happen to us into our next life, it is sort of, that we can discuss all day, and we can go through different schools of thought, and they'll explain how the nature of reincarnation happens. But with karma in this lifetime, it's very abstract in the sense that when you put out goodness, actually a scripture, a verse that says,